Hey, listeners, welcome to another bonus episode of the Go Flush Yourself podcast. Just Matt here today. And unfortunately, I'm back again to talk about public lands. Hopefully, you're seeing it all over your social media feeds, on podcasts, YouTube channels, etc. From some of the organizations you follow, I know Pheasants Forever, I know Meat Eater, Onyx, a ton of groups out there are trying to get this message out regarding public lands being up for sale, or at least what's happening is the Senate right now is putting that in their new budget bill, and it's not just Utah and I believe it was Arizona before that was in the House bill, although that was bad enough. It's several states around the West, including my home state of Washington. A lot of it's national forest land, a lot of land that not just us hunters, bird hunters use, that a lot of people use when they go outside. What you can do, I'll get right to it right up front. What you can do is call your senator. I'll put the phone number in the podcast description. You call that switchboard in DC. It can connect you right to your senators, and you can leave a message with a rep there, and they will get that to your senator. Every state has 2 senators, if you weren't aware. So you can call both and let them know. Even if you have senators who you believe are going to vote against the sale of public land, let them know. Let them know this is an important issue, because they need to know as well that this is something to fight for and this is something to stand up for, because they have their constituents reaching out to them, even though maybe they've already said that they're against this part of the bill, but it's somewhere that we don't want them to bend on at all. I have trying not to get political on this. This podcast really isn't meant to be political in any way, but this is too big of a deal right now for us not to use any venue and avenue we have to share this information and get it out there. So I've heard a couple things from folks, and I'm not an expert in this, but I am someone who I think pays enough attention to have a pretty good idea of what's going on. There's a couple things I've heard from folks who are out in the outdoors, or maybe they're not, doesn't matter, but the people I'm thinking of are, and use public land and are still okay with it being sold. A lot of it is around that the federal government shouldn't own it, and I think part of that, I'll say misunderstanding, at least from my perspective, and I think many folks' perspective, is that we own it. It's public land. We own public land. BHA has that saying, public landowner. You can get the t-shirts and bumper stickers of that and whatnot. You are a public landowner. The federal government manages it. Like the folks that work in the federal government, they're managing that land. An analogy I like to use, and it's barely an analogy because it's almost on the nose, to help folks understand this. If you think the federal government owns it and that's not us, that's not you and me owning that land, is let's imagine that you went out and bought 40 acres, 100 acres, whatever, of some land. And you were going to use that land for hunting, maybe you're going to build a cabin, maybe camping, recreation. It's rural land. And you had some neighbors that were doing the same thing with land around it. And let's say that game and wildlife departments, all that didn't exist. It was just land you own. You could do whatever you want with it, and the animals on it were yours to do what you wanted with. There were no limits, nothing. Which I think is kind of the argument of folks out there who think the federal government owns it and all this stuff. And if you did that and you're thinking, man, I kind of want this, because it's kind of sweet. We have some deer out here. We got some birds. We got all this game I'm after. And I don't want my neighbor shooting all the deer up. If, like they should be kind of responsible, only take what they need. Well, maybe you and a neighbor get together and kind of make some agreements on that land. That, hey, we're only going to take X amount of deer. And you're not experts, you're not wildlife biologists, but you have a good idea. That's all we need, and that should keep the population sustainable. Well, let's say that's successful, and you grow, and you get other neighbors in your group, and you have a whole cohort of landowners around you agreeing, yep, we're only going to take X amount of deer per year, and population's doing great. Well, if enough of you get together and are doing this, you might go, it would be great if we went and talked to a wildlife biologist, some sort of expert in this kind of thing and see if they can tell us like the exact amount, maybe some ideas of how we could grow populations even more and make this really sweet deal. And you go out and as a cohort of neighbors and landowners who are all in the same area, maybe there's a dozen plus of you now, and you get a big chunk of land and you're sharing the land and everything's great. And you hire this wildlife biologist and they come and do some good work and help you figure it out. And you can imagine that kind of thing, if you're doing it right, could grow and grow and grow. And that's essentially what we have, right? It's just so dang big. It's tough to get your brain around how big it actually is. And we have all this public land at our disposal for lack of a better word, for our use, that's a better word, that we think someone else is controlling it when they set rules and limits and that kind of thing. Just because it's your land doesn't mean you can do what you want on it. We all share it together, and therefore we have some agreed upon through our democracy, through our process and our laws in our country and our states of how we're going to use that land and how we're going to manage the wildlife populations in the land. It's not much different from the description I described if you were trying to work with your neighbors to manage a chunk of land. We're just managing a very large chunk of land. The federal government's doing it for us, and our tax dollars go to take care of that. Hopefully that helps if anyone out there is thinking that it's the federal government's land and they got to balance this budget and it'd be better if they didn't own it. That's hopefully sheds light. If it's for one person, great. Hopefully that was no news to you and you're like, yeah, I know that's how it works. Most of you, I think, will be that way, but in case you're not and you haven't really thought about from that perspective, hopefully that helps. The second thing I've heard a lot of is the state should own the land. And I don't know if I have the best way to explain that because I don't have the data and facts, but a few episodes ago we had Patrick Berry on the show from BHA. He's the CEO and president of BHA, and he said it much better than I could. So I'm actually going to play just the very end of that podcast he was on where he talked about this exact thing. And even if you listen to it one time, give it a listen, share it with your friends, share it with anyone else you know to get the word out that we need to let our senators, and then probably again eventually the House and maybe back to the senators again. This might go on for a while and probably will. That we're not okay with our public lands being sold off, because once they're gone, they're gone. So with that, I asked Patrick during the podcast to kind of give his spiel on public lands and to tell folks what they could do, and that's what you're going to hear here in a second next from Patrick.
Interestingly, most of my best upland bird covers around here in the Northeast where I live are public land, national forest or state wildlife management areas. I mean, certainly there's some great public land, and I don't think that I'm unique. In fact, I think public lands are the quintessential and irreplaceable American ideal. It's where we pass down our passion for hunting, fishing, and wild places from generation to generation. And it is very distinctive to North America. I mean, this is a privilege that is not shared in other countries around the world. And unfortunately, they're under constant threat because the forces, particularly in the western half of the United States, to sell them, liquidate them, privatize them, are pretty strong. And special interests often have influence over elected officials, even though, close to 75 to 80% of Americans are supportive of public land resources. It does matter when there's a threat to public land that you call and that you write. Matt, I'm sure you were following that, just within the last couple of weeks, there was a provision put into a must-pass budget bill in the House. And at the very last minute, without debate, one of the last things that was put into the bill was the ability to sell up to 500,000 acres of public land in Utah and Nevada that we all own.
Yep.
And once it's gone for good. And the reality is that the states cannot afford to manage those lands. Most states have a balanced budget amendment, and between infrastructure, maintenance, fire suppression, timber management, you name it, states cannot afford to pay to own those lands, and they're forced to sell them. Utah was granted a huge amount of public land at the time of statehood. And by the way, it does say in the Utah Constitution that they disclaim any future right to ownership of public lands. In other words,
Oh,
at the time of statehood in their constitution, they accepted public lands were an important part of their state. That doesn't mean that they haven't tried to change their mind
right.
from political forces, but the reality is that they've already sold off half of the state of their own public land that they had, which was designed to support their schools. So they sold out their own educational assets by selling that because they had to. And you can go on their state's website. They're auctioning off more right now.
Jeez.
So when these irreplaceable publicly owned assets that are a part of who we are, a culture and tradition of Americans, and is the it's the unifying nonpartisan issue of the day, even though elected officials don't often seem to know that, the electorate sure does. When you call, when you write, when you let them know that, you know what, you support public land, for all its uses, including the mixed use mandate of, mining, ranching, logging, timber extraction, and yes, public recreation and hunting and wildlife habitat and all those things that we enjoy, that matters. And what matters even more is that your favorite elected official, who is just the person that represents who you are, may step out, oppose public land, try to sell public land, and it will matter when you let them know, look, you're my person, but I'm not down with this at all. And that sends a message. And I feel as though we have a responsibility as, hunters in this country to be willing to take on the responsibility, to have the courage to let elected officials know, regardless of party or whether you voted for them, like, I am not down with this at all. Once they're gone for good. And so, yeah, I would encourage folks to engage and get involved. You don't have to be have the confidence or experience to do it. And we always have all the up-to-date information. It's what we do at Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. We are the voice for public lands, waters, and wildlife, and we're not swayed by politics or donors or anything like that. And we love to work collaboratively, but we're also willing to step in and take on a fight that comes to our doorstep. And there seem to be a heck of a lot of them these days.
There you have it, friend Patrick Barry. Hopefully that message was probably clearer than I went through. But please, please, please contact your senators. Pheasants Forever has a great, easy form you can do to email, call also, get your voice out there, be heard, make sure everyone knows that public land sale is not okay. Hopefully in the next podcast, we can talk about fun things like dogs and birds and shotguns and all that fun stuff. But in the meantime, thanks for listening to another episode of the Go Flush Yourself podcast. Call your senator.